Orc woman hunts a human architect for 7 days, but he planned a fatal trap. Some people hunt for survival. Others hunt for glory. Threnna Shadowstep hunted because she was the best, and everyone knew it. At 29 years old, she had tracked and eliminated 43 targets without a single failure. Merchants who betrayed their clans. Deserters who fled during war. Humans who ventured too deep into Orc territory with maps they shouldn't have drawn. This contract should have been number 44. Simple, clean. 7 days to find one human architect who knew too much about Warlord Gorvak's fortress. 7 days to make him disappear before he could sell those secrets to the highest bidder. What Threnna didn't know, what no one could have known, was that Gideon Sterling wasn't running from her. He was designing something far more dangerous than any fortress. He was building the perfect trap, and she was walking straight into it. This is a story about two people who thought they were in control. About the moment when the hunter realizes she's been prey all along. About choices that feel like freedom, but might be nothing more than following a blueprint someone else drew in the dirt. The contract came on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and bad decisions. Threnna stood in Gorvak's counting chamber, a room that always felt too small despite being the size of a human tavern. The warlord sat behind a desk made from what used to be a catapult, his massive frame hunched over piles of gold coins. Click, click, click. The sound of his fingers sorting metal had the rhythm of a countdown clock. "Gideon Sterling," Gorvak said, not looking up from his coins. His tusks were filed sharp, the way older orcs did when they wanted to remind everyone they'd earned their scars the hard way. Human. Architect. 34 years breathing air he doesn't deserve. Threnna watched him count. Watched him avoid her eyes. When an orc warlord who'd gutted 20 men in single combat couldn't look at you while describing a target, it meant one thing. Betrayal. This wasn't about security. This was about secrets someone wished they'd never shared. "What did he build for you?" she asked. Click, click. Another stack completed. "That's not your concern. It is if I'm walking into a trap. You." Gorvak finally looked up, his eyes the color of old amber. "You're Shadowstep. You don't walk into traps. You are the trap." Flattery from a warlord. Another bad sign. Threnna had survived this long by recognizing when someone was sending her towards something they were afraid to face themselves. She crossed her arms, feeling the leather of her armor creak, armor that had been her mother's, before a human arrow made sure she'd never wear it again. 7 days, Gorvak said, pushing a pouch across the desk. It landed with the heavy thud of gold that wanted to be spent. He's somewhere in the Thornwood. Left 3 nights ago with nothing but a pack and his precious drawing tools. 7 days, Threnna. After that, he reaches the human territories and we lose him forever. She picked up the pouch without opening it, weighing it by feel alone. Twice her usual rate. 3 times what a simple hunt should cost. The gold was heavy, too heavy. But Threnna had rent to pay and a reputation that didn't maintain itself. "I'll bring you proof," she said. "I don't want proof." Gorvak returned to his coins, dismissing her with the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to those born into power. "I want silence. The permanent kind." Threnna left without another word. Behind her, the click of coins being counted continued. The sound of a warlord trying to calculate whether he'd just bought a solution or created a bigger problem. The Thornwood Forest had a reputation for swallowing people who didn't respect it. Ancient trees grew so close together that sunlight only reached the ground in broken pieces, like someone had shattered the sky and scattered the fragments. Moss covered everything that stayed still for more than a season. The air tasted green, that particular flavor of growth and decay happening simultaneously. Threnna found Gideon's trail within the first hour. Too easy. A broken branch here. Boot prints in soft earth there. A scrap of cloth caught on thorns that practically waved at her like a flag. This was either the work of a complete amateur or someone who wanted to be found. She crouched beside a depression in the ground where he'd rested, pressing her palm against the disturbed leaves. Still warm. 8 hours old. Maybe less. For a human on foot carrying supplies, he was making impressive time. Not running in panic. Moving with purpose. Following a route he'd planned. Zograk had taught her to read trails the way humans read books. Her old mentor, silent for 40 years after losing his tongue to a human torturer, could track a sparrow through a hurricane. He'd taught her that every person left a story in their footsteps. The length of their stride told you their mood. The depth of their prints revealed their weight and burden. The pattern of broken vegetation showed whether they were running from something or toward it. Gideon Sterling's story was strange. He wasn't fleeing, he was leading. The first droplets of rain began to fall. Threnna looked up at the canopy, watching water find its way through layers of leaves. Rain would wash away scent trails and soften the ground, until tracks became ghosts. She had maybe 2 hours before this became significantly harder. She moved forward, following boot prints that seemed almost courteous in their clarity. Her hand rested on the knife at her belt, her father's blade, iron folded 40 times until it could split hair. She'd killed her first target with this knife, a human merchant who'd been selling orc children to fighting pits. The memory still tasted like copper and justice. The trail led her to a clearing where someone had built a fire. Recently. The stones around it were still radiating heat into the cooling air. Threnna circled the campsite, reading it like Zograk had taught her. One person. No signs of panic. He'd cooked something. Fish, based on the bones left behind. Arranged them in a neat pile. Even cleaned his cooking pot. Who stopped to clean cookware when running for their life? Then she saw it. Scratched into the dirt beside the fire. A circle. Perfect. Too perfect to be accidental. And inside it, architectural marks she didn't fully understand. Measurements, angles, notations in a language of lines and numbers. The rain intensified. Within minutes, the drawing would be gone. But Threnna had already seen enough. This wasn't a desperate man fleeing into the wilderness. This was someone who'd planned every step, who knew she was coming, who was leaving her messages. She should have turned back, should have reported to Gorvak that this contract stank of manipulation. But Threnna Shadowstep had never abandoned a hunt in her life. 43 successful eliminations. 43 times she'd been the one who decided when the chase ended. The rain washed away the circle in the dirt. Threnna moved deeper into the thornwood, following a trail that felt less like tracking and more like reading directions someone had written specifically for her. Behind her, in the warlord's counting chamber, Gorvak would still be sorting coins. Click, click, click. The sound of a man trying to calculate whether his hired killer would solve his problem or become part of it. Day 2 arrived with fog thick enough to chew. Threnna woke with her back against an oak tree that had probably seen 100 years of hunters pass through these woods. Most of them were bones now. The forest remembered everything and forgot nothing. She'd made good time yesterday despite the rain, covered maybe 15 miles through terrain that didn't believe in straight lines. Her muscles ached with the particular soreness that came from climbing over fallen trees and wading through streams that ran fast with mountain runoff. Her armor was still damp, leather trying to remember its shape after being soaked and dried too many times. The trail continued, clear as yesterday, too clear. Boot prints in mud that seemed positioned to catch her attention. A torn piece of fabric hanging from a branch at exactly eye level. At one point she found a cairn. Stones stacked deliberately to mark a path. Who built trail markers when fleeing for their life? By midday, Threnna began to feel it. That creeping sensation at the base of her skull that every hunter recognized. The feeling of being watched. She stopped, turning slowly, scanning the underbrush for movement. Nothing. Just trees and fog and the sound of water dripping from 10,000 leaves. But the feeling persisted. She was alone in these woods. She knew she was alone. She'd been tracking long enough to sense when predators were near. This wasn't the presence of another person. This was something worse. This was the awareness that every step she took had been anticipated. Every choice she made had already been made for her. The thornwood stretched endlessly in all directions. Threnna had hunted here before, knew its patterns, its dangers, knew which mushrooms would kill you in minutes, and which streams ran safe enough to drink. But today, the forest felt different, like it was conspiring with someone, like the trees themselves had been given instructions. She found him just before sunset, or rather she found where he'd been, a second campsite, more careful than the first. The firestones arranged in a pattern that wasn't random, a geometric design that spoke of someone who saw the world in angles and measurements, and beside the cold ashes, another drawing, this one more elaborate, a map, not of the forest, of something else. Something with walls and passages and rooms that seemed to fold in on themselves. Threnna studied it, tried to understand what she was seeing. Was this the fortress he'd built for Gorvak? A warning? A confession? The rain had started again, lighter this time, and she watched the drawing begin to blur, lines running like ink into the earth. That's when she heard it, faint, almost lost in the sound of rain on leaves. Humming. Someone was humming a melody, and it was coming from the direction Gideon had gone. Every instinct screamed trap. Threnna drew her knife anyway, moved toward the sound with the careful steps of someone who'd learned that overconfidence killed more hunters than bad luck ever did. The humming continued. A human song. Something about mountains and morning light. The kind of song you sang when you weren't afraid, when you wanted to be heard. She found nothing. Just another clearing with more boot prints and the lingering sense that she'd arrived exactly when she was supposed to. The humming had stopped. The forest had gone quiet in that way that meant everything was listening. Threnna made camp that night with her back against a rock face, positioning herself so nothing could approach from behind. She didn't sleep, just watched the darkness and thought about circles that closed and trails that felt more like invitations than accidents. In the morning, she would find the compass, and everything would change. And after Eve, on day 3 began with certainty. Threnna woke knowing today would be different. She'd been a hunter long enough to trust her instincts about these things. The way prey moved told you when they were running out of options. Gideon Sterling had been leading her in circles, not lost, but deliberate patterns that took her deeper into the Thornwood's heart. The trail continued northwest, toward the rocky highlands where the forest began to thin, toward terrain that favored someone who knew the landscape. Threnna moved faster now, less careful, a mistake she'd later recognize as the first crack in her confidence. She found it at midday, right where the trail forked between 2 massive oak trees that had grown twisted around each other like lovers frozen mid-embrace, lying in the exact center of the path. Impossible to miss. The silver compass. Threnna stopped, stared at it. The metal caught what little sunlight filtered through the canopy, glinting like a piece of fallen sky. Old silver. Tarnished, but well-maintained. The kind of object that had weight beyond its physical properties. The kind of object that carried history. She shouldn't have picked it up. Knew she shouldn't. But Zograk had taught her that understanding your prey meant understanding their tools. She crouched, lifted the compass carefully, turned it in her hands. Beautiful craftsmanship. The kind that took years to learn and a lifetime to master. Along the outer ring, letters so small they were almost invisible. Every circle closes. The inscription hit her like a fist. Every circle closes. Every hunt ends. Every path loops back to its beginning. She'd been following Gideon's trail for 3 days, and only now did she understand. This wasn't a chase. This was a guided tour. He'd been dropping breadcrumbs for a hunter he knew would follow, leading her in patterns, in circles. Threnna looked at the compass's needle. It spun freely, unmagnetized. Useless for navigation, but the tool itself, the sharp point designed to pierce paper and draw perfect circles, that was something else. She tested it against her thumb. Drew blood. Sharp enough to mark trees. Sharp enough to leave the kind of signs she'd been following. He'd been marking his own trail. Not carelessly, not in panic, with architectural precision. Every broken branch exactly where a tracker would see it. Every boot print perfectly positioned. He'd drawn a path through the thornwood, and she'd followed it like someone walking a labeled blueprint. The hunter hesitated. Threnna sat down right there in the middle of the trail, compass in hand, and did something she rarely allowed herself. She doubted. 3 days of pursuit, and suddenly every assumption she'd made felt hollow. She was tracking someone who didn't fear her, who expected her, who'd planned for her. The forest continued its eternal routine. Birds moved through branches. Small animals rustled in undergrowth. Water ran over stones somewhere distant. None of it cared that a orc huntress was having what humans called an existential crisis. She thought of Zograk, her mentor who'd lost his tongue but never lost his wisdom. He'd communicated once through hand signs. The deadliest prey isn't the one that runs fastest. It's the one that makes you think you're winning. Threnna closed her fist around the compass, felt the metal warm against her green skin, made a choice. Not the smart choice, the proud choice. She would continue. She would find Gideon Sterling, and she would make him explain why he'd turned this hunt into a game. She stood, pocketed the compass, followed the trail north. Behind her, in the dirt where she'd been sitting, her own boot prints marked the ground. Later she'd realize. She was leaving a trail now, too. One that led back to a campsite she'd picked, to places she'd chosen to rest. She was writing her own story into the forest floor, and someone might be reading it. The thornwood grew darker as she moved deeper. The trees here were older, bigger, the kind that had roots going down so deep they touched the bones of the world. Threnna had never been this far into the heart of the forest. Few had. This was territory that belonged to older things, to creatures that remembered when orcs were young and humans were new. The trail led to a ravine, steep, rocky, the kind of natural barrier that forced decisions. Down was dangerous. Around would add miles. Gideon's boot prints led straight to the edge and disappeared. Either he'd climbed down, difficult with a pack, or he'd gone around and was hoping she'd waste time searching for his trail below. Threnna looked down into the ravine, looked at the compass in her hand, thought about circles and choices and architects who built traps from expectations. She went around, picked up the trail again an hour later, smiled despite herself. He'd expected her to go down, had left false signs pointing to a descent, but Threnna hadn't survived 43 contracts by being predictable. For the first time in 3 days, she felt like the hunter again, like she was making choices that weren't written into some blueprint. It was a good feeling. It would last exactly until tomorrow morning when the trap finally sprang. Day 4 arrived with violence. Not the kind Threnna expected. Not steal or ambush. The kind that came from the earth itself deciding to reveal secrets. She'd made camp on what seemed like solid ground. Rocky outcropping, good visibility, defensible. All the things Zograk had taught her to look for. She woke to the sound of cracking stone and the sensation of the world tilting sideways. The ground beneath her wasn't ground at all. It was a covering, branches and moss carefully arranged over a pit, and it was giving way. Threnna rolled, instinct, training. 43 successful hunts worth of muscle memory that didn't wait for her brain to catch up. She hit solid earth just as the false floor collapsed into darkness. The sound echoed, deep. This wasn't a simple game trap. This was engineering. She looked down into the pit, couldn't see bottom. Darkness swallowed everything below 15 feet. If she'd been sleeping 2 feet to the left, she'd be falling right now. Still falling, probably. This trap had depth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. First time in 3 days she'd felt genuine fear. Not concern, not caution. Fear. The kind that came from realizing you weren't playing against an amateur. You were playing against someone who understood exactly how hunters thought, who knew where they'd camp, how they'd position themselves, what they'd consider safe ground. Threnna stood carefully, tested every step. The solid earth around the pit felt suddenly suspect. How many more of these were out here? How long had he spent preparing this forest? Days? Weeks? How long had Gideon Sterling known she was coming before Gorvak ever sent her? The questions multiplied. The confidence she'd felt yesterday evaporated like morning fog. She was in someone else's world now, fighting by someone else's rules. Every piece of ground was potentially false. Every solid-looking path might be another carefully constructed lie. She continued, more carefully now, testing weight before committing, watching not just for his trail but for signs of construction. The Thornwood had become an extension of Gideon's blueprint. Trees were no longer just trees. They were potential load-bearing structures. Clearings were no longer just clearings. They were potential kill zones designed to funnel movement. By midday, she found the second trap. This one she spotted before triggering it. A tripwire, almost invisible. Thin cord stretched between trees at ankle height. She followed it with her eyes, traced it to what it would trigger. A simple deadfall. Logs suspended above the path, held by tension. Step on the wire, logs dropped. Nothing sophisticated, but effective. Threnna stared at it. This trap was obvious, deliberately obvious. A hunter would see this one, would feel clever for spotting it, would step around it. And she traced that path with her eyes, saw the second tripwire, hidden in the spot where someone avoiding the first trap would step. Clever, she said aloud. Her first words in 4 days. They sounded strange in the empty forest. She went around both traps, off the path entirely, through dense underbrush that made every step a negotiation with thorns and roots. It added an hour to her travel time, but she was still alive, still moving forward, still hunting. The trail continued, still marked, still clear. Gideon wanted her to follow, wanted her moving deeper, but now every sign felt like a lie wrapped in truth. Real boot prints that led to dangerous ground, genuine trail markers pointing toward prepared killing zones. She found his campsite just before sunset, 4th camp. Each one had been progressively more elaborate. This one had a fire pit constructed from stones arranged in perfect geometric patterns, a shelter built against a rock face using branches lashed together with rope, and drawings, dozens of drawings sketched into the dirt around the camp. Floor plans, elevation diagrams, technical specifications for things she didn't understand. But one drawing was different. This one showed the Thornwood, a map, and on it marked clearly positions. 5 locations highlighted. 4 of them she recognized. Her campsites, the places she'd chosen to rest, all marked with perfect accuracy on his map. Threnna felt cold despite the warm evening air. He'd been watching. Or he'd predicted so perfectly where she'd stop that watching hadn't been necessary. Every choice she'd made, he'd known. Every spot that seemed defensible he'd anticipated. She wasn't hunting him. She was following a script he'd written. The 5th mark on the map was ahead, northwest, where the forest met ancient caves that went deep into the mountain, where the Thornwood ended and something older began. That's where this was going. That's where he wanted her. She could turn back, report to Gorvak that this target was beyond her capabilities, take the failure, the first of her career, or she could continue, follow the blueprint to its conclusion, see what an architect built when he had a hunter as his material. Threnna touched the compass in her pocket, felt its weight. Every circle closes, every hunt ends, every choice leads somewhere. The question was whether she was choosing or being chosen for. She made camp 50 yards from his site, in a spot not marked on his map. Small rebellion. Probably meaningless. Probably he'd accounted for even this. But it made her feel like she still had agency. Like she still had choices that were her own. That night she dreamed of circles, of compasses drawing endless loops, of trails that led back to their beginning, of traps built from expectation and confidence, and the assumption that you were the predator instead of the prey. She woke to dawn in the certain knowledge that today would be the day everything ended, one way or another. The circle was closing. Day 5 brought her to the caves. Not ancient orc caves, carved with purpose and history. These were natural, older than any civilization, the kind of darkness that existed before creatures learned to make light. The trail ended at the entrance, a mouth in the mountain face wide enough for 3 orcs to walk side by side. Gideon's boot prints led straight in and disappeared into shadow. No more marked trail, no more breadcrumbs, just invitation and darkness and the choice to enter or walk away. Threnna stood at the threshold. Every instinct screamed trap. You didn't follow prey into enclosed spaces where they controlled terrain. You didn't enter caves without backup, without light sources, without escape routes. You didn't walk into someone else's design when that someone was an architect who'd spent 5 days proving he was 3 steps ahead. She entered anyway, because turning back meant accepting defeat, meant returning to Gorvak with nothing, meant 43 successes ending with 1 failure that would define her more than all the victories combined. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The cave was wrong, not natural. The walls too smooth, the passage too straight. This had been worked, modified, shaped by hands that understood how stone behaved under pressure. Light filtered in through cracks in the ceiling, not enough to see clearly. Just enough to create shadows that moved when she did. Just enough to make her question what was rock and what was illusion. The passage descended. Water ran somewhere nearby. She could hear it echoing off stone. The air tasted of minerals and time. Her footsteps echoed, making it impossible to hear if anyone else was moving, if something was following, if someone was ahead. The corridor opened into a chamber, larger, circular, and lit. Torches mounted on the walls burned with fresh fire. Someone had been here recently. Someone had prepared this space. Threnna drew her knife, held her father's blade ready, scanned the chamber. Empty. Just stone and fire and the sound of her own breathing amplified by perfect acoustics. The chamber was a circle. Of course it was a circle. Every circle closes. Hello, Threnna Shadowstep. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Echoes made it impossible to pinpoint. Male, human, calm. The voice of someone who'd expected this exact moment. Gideon Sterling, she said. Not a question. The architect you've been hunting for 5 days, though I suspect you've realized by now that you weren't really hunting. You were touring. I'm sorry about the deception. And the traps. I imagine the pit trap this morning was particularly unpleasant. Show yourself. Not yet. I'd like to talk first. And I think you'd like to listen. Because if you wanted me dead, you'd have found me days ago. But you haven't. You've been following my trail, reading my signs, trying to understand, haven't you? Threnna said nothing. Let silence be her answer. I've studied you, Threnna Shadowstep. Read every report I could find about your work. 43 successful eliminations. Never captured. never failed. You're famous in certain circles. The orc huntress who never loses. And I needed someone exactly like you. For what? To tell a story. To prove a point. To break a pattern that's been running for too long. You were sent here to kill me because I know things about Gorvak's fortress. Secrets about how it's built. Weaknesses in its design. He hired me to make his stronghold unbreakable. And I did. I made it perfect. And then I realized what I'd built. A prison. A torture chamber. A factory for turning people into weapons. The echoes died. Threnna waited. You were supposed to be his weapon. His precision tool. Sent to eliminate a problem. But you're not a weapon, Threnna. You're a person making choices. And I wanted to give you one more choice. The most important one. Movement. He emerged from a passage she hadn't seen. Clever architecture making doors invisible until you knew where to look. Gideon Sterling. Human. Average height. Dark hair going gray at temples. 34 years old but carrying himself like someone who'd lived more. No armor. No weapons visible. Just tools. Drawing instruments. And that compass. She realized she had the copy. He held the original. They stood across from each other. Hunter and architect. Orc and human. Two people who'd been circling each other for 5 days, finally meeting at the circle's center. You could kill me now, Gideon said quietly. Complete your contract. Collect your gold. Return to Gorvak as the huntress who never fails. But before you do, I want you to know what you'll be protecting. What that fortress really is. What happens to the people inside it. And then you can make a choice that's actually yours. Threnna held her knife. Studied him. This man who'd led her through the Thornwood. Who'd built traps she'd barely survived. Who'd predicted her moves before she made them. And she asked the question that had been growing for 5 days. Why didn't you just kill me? You had opportunities. The pit trap. The deadfall. You could have made any of them lethal. Why let me live? Gideon smiled. Sad, tired. Because I'm not trying to win, Threnna. I'm trying to wake you up. You're the deadliest hunter in the territories. And you're working for a monster. I needed you to see that. To choose differently. To break the circle. The chamber fell silent. 2 people. 2 choices. And the weight of what came next, sitting heavy between them like the mountain above their heads. I built it, Gideon said, and his voice carried the weight of confession. Every stone, every passage, every cell. Gorvak's fortress isn't a stronghold. It's a machine designed to break people. Threnna didn't lower her knife. That's not my concern. You took payment. You built what he asked. Now you want to betray him because you developed a conscience? No. I want to stop him because I finally understand what I enabled. Gideon set down his compass. His original. The one that matched hers. Come, I want to show you something. Then you can decide. He led her deeper into the cave system. Through passages that showed signs of recent work. Fresh tool marks. Cleared rubble. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a project. And as they walked, Gideon talked. Gorvak hired me 3 years ago. Promised a fortress that would protect orc clans from human expansion. I believed him. Thought I was helping. The pay was generous. The challenge was interesting. I spent 2 years designing something beautiful. Something perfect. They entered a chamber filled with drawings. Not sketched in dirt. Proper blueprints on parchment, pinned to walls. Detailed floor plans. Structural diagrams. And as Threnna's eyes adjusted, she saw what they depicted. A fortress, yes, but also cells, interrogation rooms, chambers designed for pain, architectural specifications for maximizing suffering while minimizing escape. I realized too late, Gideon continued. The protection Gorvak wanted wasn't defense. It was control. Those rooms I designed? They're filled with orcs who questioned him, who disagreed with his wars, who wanted peace instead of expansion. Your own people, Threnna. Locked in beautiful cells I crafted to be inescapable. Threnna moved through the chamber, studying the blueprints. Her hands shook slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. She knew Gorvak was brutal. All warlords were. But this was systematic, industrial. Architecture turned into oppression. Why should I believe you? She asked. Because you already do. You've been questioning this contract from the beginning. You knew something was wrong when Gorvak wouldn't look at you while describing the target. When he paid triple your rate, when he wanted silence instead of proof. You're here because some part of you knew this wasn't a clean hunt. Threnna touched one blueprint. Floor plan for what Gideon labeled compliance chambers. Rooms designed to break resistance through isolation and sensory deprivation. She'd seen cells before. This was different. This was cruelty given architectural form. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Help me destroy it. The fortress has weaknesses I built deliberately. Backdoors. Structural flaws that look like design choices, but are actually sabotage. I spent my last 6 months there making sure it could be brought down. But I need someone inside. Someone Gorvak trusts. Someone who could get close enough to trigger the collapse. You want me to betray my contract. I want you to complete a different contract. One with yourself. One where you decide what kind of hunter you want to be." Threnna turned to face him. This human who'd led her through 5 days of traps and tests. Who'd studied her so thoroughly he could predict where she'd camp. Who'd known exactly how to make her question everything. "This whole chase," she said. "The trail, the compass, the traps. It was all theater. You were teaching me. Showing me what it feels like to be manipulated by someone who understands you. Making me experience what those orcs in Gorvak's cells experience." Gideon nodded. "Every choice you made was real. But the context was designed. I wanted you to understand what it means to be a tool in someone else's plan. To be used. And if I refuse, if I complete my original contract right now." She raised her knife. Not threatening. Testing. "Then I die. Gorvak's fortress stands. And you return to being his perfect weapon until the day someone puts you in one of those cells for knowing too much. Because that's what warlords do, Threnna. They use people until they're problems, then they eliminate them." The chamber felt smaller suddenly. The weight of choices pressing down like the mountain above. Threnna thought of her 43 contracts. Clean eliminations. Simple moral calculus. Bad people removed from the world. But this was different. This was choosing sides in a war she didn't fully understand. Betraying a warlord. Becoming hunted instead of hunter. "How do I know you're not manipulating me now?" she asked. "You don't. You'll never know for certain. That's what makes this a real choice. I've shown you the evidence, told you my story. Now you have to decide what truth you believe, what kind of orc you want to be, what legacy you want beyond 43 bodies." Silence filled the spaces between them. Threnna looked at the blueprints. At the chambers designed for breaking people. At architectural genius turned toward darkness. She thought of Zograk, her mentor who'd lost his tongue to human cruelty, but still taught her that the deadliest prey makes you think you're winning. She thought of the compass. Every circle closes. Every choice leads somewhere. "If I help you," she said slowly, "if I go against Gorvak, I become a traitor. I lose everything. My reputation, my contracts, my life as I know it. Yes. But you gain something else. The knowledge that you stopped being a tool and started being a person who makes real choices, even if those choices destroy you." Threnna studied this human architect. This man who'd spent 5 days teaching her what it meant to be manipulated. Who'd shown her the difference between following a trail and walking a blueprint. Who'd brought her to this moment in a cave deep underground where every option felt like falling. She made her choice. The one Gideon had been designing for. The one she hoped was truly hers. "Show me the weaknesses," she said, lowering her knife. "Show me how to bring it down." Gideon's expression didn't change. No triumph, no relief, just acknowledgement. "Thank you, Threnna Shadowstep, for being the person I hoped you were instead of the weapon Gorvak tried to make you." They spent the next hours going through blueprints. Gideon explained structural weaknesses. Load-bearing pillars that weren't. Support beams designed to fail under specific stress. A fortress that looked indestructible, but was actually a controlled demolition waiting for its trigger. "It'll collapse from the inside out," Gideon explained, his finger tracing support structures on the plans. "If you can reach this central pillar, here, in the main hall, and remove this keystone, the entire eastern wing comes down. Chain reaction. The fortress doesn't explode. It folds in on itself. Anyone inside has approximately 12 minutes to evacuate. And Gorvak? His private chambers are in the eastern wing. He'll either run or be buried. Either way, his power ends." Threnna memorized the plans, studied the architecture. She'd been inside Gorvak's fortress twice before, knew its general layout. With these details she could navigate it, could reach the keystone, could bring it down. "When?" she asked. "Tonight. He'll expect you back in 7 days. You're early. He won't have his guard fully up. It has to be now, while surprise is still possible." Threnna nodded, looked at this human who'd changed everything. "What about you?" "I stay here. If you succeed, I'm a traitor who helped destroy a warlord's seat of power. I'll be hunted by every orc clan loyal to Gorvak. If you fail, I'm already dead. Either way, this cave becomes my home for however long I last. That's not much of a life. No, but it's one I can live with. That's more than I could say before. They stood together in silence. Hunter and Architect, two people who'd spent 5 days circling each other, now facing the same direction. Threnna reached into her pocket, pulled out the duplicate compass, set it beside Gideon's original. Every circle closes, she said. Yes, but we get to choose how. The fortress looked exactly as Threnna remembered it. Massive, imposing, beautiful in the way that violence could be beautiful when given form and structure. Stone walls that had been designed to last centuries, gates that could withstand siege weapons, architecture that declared permanence and power. She approached at dusk, not sneaking, walking openly. The guard who challenged her, an orc named Brock she'd shared drinks with, nodded recognition. Shadow Step, you're back early. Warlord said 7 days. Found him faster than expected. Where's Gorvak? Counting chamber. Where else? Brock grinned, showing filed tusks. That orc loves his gold more than his own children, which is probably good since he sold 3 of them to fighting pits last month. The words hit Threnna like a physical blow. Sold his own children. She'd known Gorvak was brutal, hadn't let herself think about what that meant, about what kind of person she'd been working for. She walked through corridors she'd walked before, but now she saw them differently. These weren't just hallways. They were Gideon's blueprints made real. Every stone placed with purpose. Every angle calculated. Architecture that looked solid but contained its own destruction, waiting patiently to be triggered. The central hall was exactly where the plans showed. Massive. The pride of Gorvak's fortress. A ceiling held up by pillars that seemed capable of supporting the sky itself, except one pillar. The one Gideon had marked. The one that looked like all the others but wasn't. The keystone hidden in plain sight. Threnna moved casually. Just another member of the fortress staff. She carried her pack, the one she'd used during the hunt, tools inside, small hammer, chisel, the implements she needed. The hall was empty. Most of the fortress gathered for evening meal. Perfect timing. Gideon had even predicted this. She approached the pillar, started working. The keystone was disguised as decorative element, but under the stone facade, softer material. Wooden framework that looked like stone but burned. Structural weakness masked as architectural detail. She worked quickly, efficiently. Removed the keystone piece by piece. The pillar began to groan. Subtle, but she heard it. Stone settling. Weight redistributing. Chain reaction beginning. What are you doing? The voice behind her was cold. Familiar. Gorvak. Threnna turned slowly. The warlord stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. His eyes, old amber, full of calculation, studied her with the intensity of someone reviewing a bad investment. Completing my contract, Threnna said calmly. By destroying my fortress? By making a choice that's actually mine. Understanding flickered across Gorvak's face. Then rage. Pure, absolute. The rage of someone who'd controlled everything, suddenly realizing control was an illusion. The architect. He turned you. That human convinced you to betray your own kind. No. He convinced me to stop betraying them. Your cells, Gorvak. The ones this human built. They're full of orcs. Our people. Ones who questioned you. Who wanted peace. You're not protecting orc clans. You're building an empire on their bones. Above them, stone groaned. Louder. The central pillar shuddered. 12 minutes, Gideon had said. 12 minutes for evacuation. The chain reaction was irreversible now. You'll die too, Gorvak said. This whole structure will collapse. Then we die together. Warlord and weapon. Seems appropriate. Gorvak lunged, not at her, at the pillar, trying to stop what she'd started, trying to reinforce. But you can't reinforce a controlled demolition once it begins. Threnna grabbed him, not to fight, to hold, to make sure he felt every moment of his fortress falling. The guards ran, smart enough to recognize structural failure, to know that loyalty wasn't worth burial. Threnna heard them shouting, evacuation orders, warning cries, people fleeing. Let go, Gorvak snarled. No, you built this. I helped you. We both created this nightmare. We should be here when it ends. Stone cracked, loud as thunder. The central pillar split. Above them, the ceiling began its inevitable collapse. Not explosive, controlled, folding inward exactly as Gideon designed, beautiful even in destruction. Architecture acknowledging its own flaws and accepting them. Threnna released Gorvak, ran, not because she wanted to live, because dying in his fortress felt too much like letting him win. She sprinted through corridors already buckling, jumped over cracks opening in floors, felt walls shudder and shift. The fortress wasn't exploding. It was surrendering, giving up its permanence, returning to the earth it was built from. She made it outside with seconds to spare, collapsed in the courtyard just as the eastern wing folded completely, watched Gorvak's seat of power become rubble, watched orcs streaming out, many from sections she hadn't known existed. From those cells Gideon showed her, prisoners freed by destruction. Not everyone made it. She saw bodies pulled from wreckage, heard screaming, smelled dust and blood and the particular scent of stone that had held weight too long. Victory always cost, always. Gorvak emerged from the ruins, bloodied, enraged, still alive. He saw her, saw what she'd done, saw his power reduced to broken stone and realized exactly who to blame. "You destroyed everything," he said. "No, I destroyed what you built. Everything that mattered was already destroyed. I just made it visible." He would have killed her, would have made her death last days. But the freed prisoners, the orcs she'd helped escape without meaning to, they surrounded him. They remembered who put them in cells, who sold their children, who turned architecture into oppression. Gorvak disappeared into a crowd of people he'd broken. Threnna heard screaming, looked away. Some circles closed violently. She walked away from the ruins, from her 43 successful contracts and one final betrayal that felt more like honesty. Walked back toward the Thornwood, toward caves where an architect waited to learn if his design had worked. Oh, Threnna found Gideon exactly where she'd left him, in the cave, surrounded by blueprints of destruction. He looked up when she entered, studied her face, said nothing. "It worked," she confirmed. "The fortress fell exactly as you planned. Gorvak, won't be a problem. And you? I'm a traitor now. Can't go back to hunting. Can't work for warlords. Can't do the only thing I've ever been good at." She sat down, felt exhaustion hit all at once. 43 successful contracts, one failure that destroyed everything. Not failure, choice. Same thing sometimes. They sat in silence. Hunter and architect, two people who'd started as predator and prey and ended as something else, something without clear definition. "What will you do now?" Gideon asked. "Don't know. Can't stay in orc territories. Can't go to human lands. Don't belong anywhere." She pulled out the compass, his duplicate, the one he'd left for her to find. "Every circle closes, but I don't know where mine goes from here." Then draw a new circle, bigger than before. One that doesn't loop back to the beginning. You make it sound simple. It's not, but it's possible. You stopped being a tool, Threnna. Now you get to discover what you are when you're not following someone else's blueprint. Outside the cave, sunset painted the Thornwood in gold and shadow. Birds called to each other, indifferent to the drama of architects and hunters. The forest continued its eternal routine, growing, decaying, existing without judgment or conclusion. Threnna Shadowstep, former elite huntress, traitor, person who'd chosen conscience over contracts, stood up, looked at Gideon Sterling, architect who'd built prisons and then destroyed them, manipulator who'd taught someone to stop being manipulated, human who'd risked everything to break a pattern. "I could still kill you," she said. "Complete the original contract. You could, but you won't." "How do you know?" "Because that circle's already closed. You're drawing new ones now, messier ones. Ones without perfect edges. But yours." Threnna nodded, pocketed the compass, walked toward the cave entrance, paused, turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for the trail, for the traps, for showing me what it feels like to be a tool, for giving me a choice that mattered. Thank you for taking it. Most don't." She left him there among his blueprints, walked into a forest that suddenly felt less like a hunting ground and more like possibility. She had no plan, no contacts, no safety net, just the knowledge that she'd stopped following trails other people marked and started choosing her own path. It wasn't a happy ending. Threnna had lost everything she'd built over 43 contracts, had made enemies of powerful orcs, had no way to make a living, had chosen morality over survival and would probably pay for it. But it was her ending, her choice, her circle, drawn with hands that finally stopped being tools and started being human. No, started being hers. That was better than human. better than Orc, just hers. Behind her in the cave, Gideon Sterling looked at his blueprints one more time, thought about the fortress he'd built and then destroyed, about the huntress he'd manipulated into freedom, about whether changing one person's path meant anything in a world full of warlords and weapons. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but he'd chosen to try, and Threnna had chosen to change. That was two circles closing in unexpected directions. Two people deciding their architecture included door instead of just walls. In the forest, Threnna walked until stars appeared through the canopy, made camp, started a fire, thought about tomorrow and the tomorrow after that, about what hunters did when they stopped hunting, about building instead of destroying, about choosing again and again every day who to be. The compass was heavy in her pocket. Every circle closes. True, but you could choose what center to circle, what axis to spin around, what mattered enough to keep orbiting. She'd find out, day by day, choice by choice, circle by circle, and that would have to be enough. Threnna made a choice in that cave. A choice that cost her everything she knew but gave her something she'd never had, the freedom to decide who she wanted to be. Now it's your turn to make a choice. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of Threnna's decision, if you believe that stories about impossible choices and characters who break their own patterns matter, then subscribe to Orcbound Tales. Because every week, we bring you stories about orcs and humans facing the kind of decisions that define who they really are. Hit that subscribe button. Join a community that believes the best stories aren't about perfect heroes, they're about broken people choosing to be better. And leave a comment telling us, if you were Threnna, would you have made the same choice? Would you have destroyed everything you built for a chance to build something new? We want to hear your story. Because every circle closes, but you get to choose how.